is Tyler Swanson, the Communications Coordinator for North Carolina NAACP. We want to invite you all and thank you all for coming to this historic press conference. I'm going to turn the press conference over to Dr. Barber, who is the North Carolina State Conference President and National Board Member. Right now, Dr. Barber.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
I first of all want to thank you for being here today, and I want to thank our President and CEO, Attorney Cornell Brooks, for being here with us this morning from the national office. I want to also today particularly mention Attorney Al McShirley, Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, Miss Sylvia Barnes, our State Secretary, and Irv Joyner and Tim Tyson, Dr. Tim Tyson, who were the initial task force that helped to write the resolution that was ultimately passed unanimously by the State Executive Committee and sent forward to our national board. Dr. Tyson is not here today, and Attorney Irv Joyner, who is a longtime professor of law. I'm also going to be asking those persons to serve with the task force that our President and CEO will mention as we move forward. You know, things, we're in a movement, and every day things are happening to show that it's right to take a moral stance, and it's right to stand for civil rights, and it's right to be in a fusion movement together. I want to mention that just yesterday, the state of North Carolina Governor Cooper and Attorney General Stein filed with the Supreme Court to let the High Court know that there remains no petitioner in this case with an interest in seeking the court's review. We had not planned to make this announcement today, but we just got this information. And on behalf of the North Carolina NAACP State Conference and the individual plaintiffs, including Ms. Rosanelle Eaton, Ms. Mary Perry, and Ms. Carolyn Q. Coleman, our Latino friends, students with the North Carolina Youth and College Division, and about 5 congregations brought litigation against HB 589 after it was signed into law. We got a unanimous decision last year in the Fourth Circuit saying that HB 589 was not a photo ID law. It was a massive voter suppression law and a restructuring of our law, and the court said that it was intentional and surgical racism. As of last night, in fact, this is what the court said: the new provision targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision, and imposed cures for problems that did not exist. That's what the case said. And so the governor who lost, McCrory, was still trying to have this case reviewed by the Supreme Court. But on yesterday, the governor and the Attorney General and the Board of Elections made it clear that there remains no petitioner in this case with an interest in seeking this court's review, which is a huge victory, a major victory. And the Fourth Circuit represents the majority of many of the southern states in these United States, and this victory is huge. This was the biggest case, voter suppression case after the Shelby decision, and this is not only just a victory here in North Carolina, but a victory for the entire NAACP, the entire civil rights community, and a victory against voter suppression, and once again proves that voter fraud is a lie. Voter suppression is alive and well, and we will fight it every day, and we will win. And we will win. We will talk more about this later. The lawyers are going to be reviewing even what this means, and also going forward, how we continue to move. Now today, I want to note that the actions of the all-white caucus of the extremists in our legislature and our former governor are out of control. they have consistently passed legislation that is a violation of our deepest moral values, voting rights, civil rights, and the fundamental principle of equal protection under the law. The federal courts have ruled against their voter suppression and their racially gerrymandered districts. We believe that their attacks on the transgender community and attempt to strip the governor of power and deny access to the courts will also be found unconstitutional. Their decision to block local municipalities, something they did in the HB 2 law, block municipalities' ability to raise wages and have minorities set aside, and their limitation to access to the state courts for employment discrimination cases are wrong. And we must stand strong against any and all attempts to deprive citizens their rights ordained by God and guaranteed by the Constitution. What has happened in North Carolina makes this state a battleground over the soul, one of the battlegrounds over the soul of America. And whether our nation is sincere about making democracy real for all people, not just those with the right bank account, the right sexuality,
That's right,
or the right skin color. I will not read right now all of the whereases to the unanimous resolution that was passed at the National Board that came up as a unanimous resolution from our executive committee, but I do want to read the resolves, and I would encourage the media to look at the whereases because it lays out why we're doing this, and it lays out all of the steps that were taken. It reads as follows. The National Board, let me make sure I have it just right, because I want to read it as they say just right. Let me have a copy, Tyler. Tyler, where's Tyler of that resolution? Today we're announcing, Mr. President, my eye's not good as yours. So let me put my other two pair back on. My other pair back on. All right. All right, here we go. All right. Whereas the North Carolina NAACP, having exhausted every possible peaceful means to address its fundamental grievances, convened its executive committee to pass a resolution to bring this matter to the National Board to ask for help in developing a national boycott campaign. And whereas on January 21st, 2017, the North Carolina NAACP Executive Committee voted unanimously to make this request to the National Board. Now, therefore, the National Board of the NAACP receives this resolution and request from our North Carolina State Conference and begins the process of dialogue with the North Carolina State Conference to form a joint task force on a North Carolina boycott with a report at our next National Board meeting in May 2017. While exploring the most effective methodologies to engage and escalate a boycott in North Carolina that would include businesses and other form of divestments, we today announced the first step of economic engagement. And the first step is that we as an association will not bring our national convention to North Carolina while these abuses continue, and we will invite our human rights, anti-racism, moral centers, including higher education and religious conferences, and all athletic, musical, and other forms of artistry to consider following our lead joining our efforts and not coming to North Carolina in this period, just as the ACC has done, as the NBA and others have done. Now, in addition to that, the reason for this is the National Board of the NAACP are doing this until such results are achieved through repeal or through the courts. And I want the media to listen very carefully so that we don't just purport that this is just about HB2. A, until North Carolina will undo racially gerrymandered districts and create fair election districts. B, until there is a repeal of the entire HB2 law that is anti-worker, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-access to the courts for employment discrimination cases. And let me just note here, we disagree with the current compromise that is being offered that will allow local people to vote on people's civil rights. That takes us backwards and does not take us forward. C, we are calling on for these actions until there is a repeal of SB 4, the law passed in special session, called for another reason that stripped trained civil servants in counties and state election board from supervising election. D, the repeal the requirement that litigants appeal to the Court of Appeals before they can file an appeal to the Supreme Court. Repeal the legislation that stripped the current governor of powers his predecessors enjoyed. So until there is a repeal, either by the legislature or action, these results are overturned through the courts, we engage this first step of pulling our convention and calling others to pull theirs, and we engage in this process of studying how we escalate and move other methodologies for bringing economic pressure. Be it further resolved that the National NAACP and the North Carolina NAACP will engage in joint media and public education campaign regarding this decision. And be it finally resolved, and this is something that we didn't send up, but the board in its wisdom added, which broadens it even beyond North Carolina. Be it resolved that in the light of the adoption by other states of similar laws that reflect racial gerrymandering, discriminatory voter identification laws and voter suppression laws, and similar types of laws to redistribute political power to the detriment of racial and ethnic minorities or change the nature of the electorate, the National NAACP will engage in applying various forms of economic sanctions or other appropriate economic or direct action to address these types of discriminatory legislative or executive actions around the nation. We announced that we were taking this unanimous decision of our executive committee a few weeks ago when some reports said there were upwards of 100,000 people in the street. We are serious. We are very serious about protecting civil rights and equal protection under the law. We have won in the courts. We have won at the ballot box. And still we have extremists that want to attempt to undermine those victories. And so when you've won in the courts and you've won in the ballot box, sometimes you have to go to the cash register. To let it be known that we will not go backwards when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to human rights, and when it comes to civil rights. And we are glad to have here today our president and CEO, national leader of the NAACP, who gave his 100, I think he said, which I mean 10% support, which is always good, as we are your troops on the ground. We are the troops of the NAACP on the ground. And I want North Carolina to give a big forward together, not one step back welcome to Attorney Cornell Brooks, the National President and CEO of the NAACP. Forward together!
Not one step back!
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is an honor to be in North Carolina, to stand beside one of the nation's most courageous, moral leaders, civil rights leaders, humanitarian leaders. That would be the Reverend Dr. William Barber. If I can ask the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP and its supporters to put their hands together for their own.
Yeah. All right.
I also want to express a word of appreciation to the authors of this historic resolution, the attorneys here, and certainly the media that is helping to bring this powerful story, this powerful civic and democratic narrative to the nation. I want to speak to two challenges before us. The first of which is the national narrative around the right to vote, and then second, the North Carolina story. We're mindful at this very present moment that the President, with the assistance of Attorney General Sessions, whom we vigorously oppose as an association, has rescinded the Obama-era guidance concerning the safety and well-being of transgender students. It is a moment in the country where we have seen across the length and breadth of our democracy an unrelenting effort to suppress the right to vote, most prominently in the state of North Carolina. In the context of the campaign, the presidential campaign, in the course of 10 months, the NAACP secured no less than 9 court victories against voter suppression, the most prominent among which is here in the state of North Carolina, where the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit held that the state legislature engaged in voter suppression with surgical precision with respect to the civic aspirations of African-American voters. Yes. Right. In this national context, where we have seen and heard in recent days that the President of the United States called for an executive order to address voter fraud. Voter fraud, which we understand here in the state of North Carolina and across the country to be pretext and excuse for voter suppression.
Yes.
We remember well that going back to the Bush era, Department of Justice, where they literally studied millions of ballots cast and found less than a handful of fraudulent ballots cast. We know from both the national context and the North Carolina context that when we talk about voter suppression, or rather voter fraud, the only form of voter fraud that is real and empirically attested to is the kind of voter fraud perpetuated not by citizens, but by politicians.
All right.
And so we note what is happening across the nation. Yes. We understand what's going on in North Carolina, and the National Board of Directors of the NAACP, in conjunction, in concert, in conversation with the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, is contemplating a very serious penalty and form of protest understood as the boycott. The NAACP does not take this matter cavalierly. We understand as a consequence of constitutional history that we attempted a boycott in a place called Port Gibson, Mississippi. We were threatened with bankruptcy. We were threatened with bringing our beloved association to its knees. And so for us to consider, to contemplate a boycott in the midst of this era of voter suppression is a serious matter indeed.
Yes, sir. Yes,
now, were it not for the fact that North Carolina has been fighting this battle of voter suppression in the streets, in the state legislature, in the courts, giving blood, sweat, and tears day in and day out, we would not take this matter so seriously. Were it not for the fact that the Reverend William Barber has literally crossed this country from one end to another, making the case that voter fraud is a fiction and that voter suppression is real. Were it not for the fact that Miss Rosanelle Eaton walked side by side with Reverend Barber and myself on a small little trek called America's Journey for Justice. A march of 1,002 miles from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C. to stand up and stand behind the vote. Were it not for the fact that right now in the state of North Carolina, we have we have children, dear God, children who are being imperiled, who face the prospect of being bullied as a consequence of politicians using them as political pawns while we talk about bathrooms. Were it not for the fact that in the state legislature, moments after an election, where our people literally fought in the courts to preserve votes, they saved, as a consequence of great litigation, 5% of the electorate in terms of imperiled votes. They literally discovered on the eve of the elections thousands of voter registrations imperiled and purged. Were it not for the fact that as we speak, the state legislature, hyped up on partisan steroids, has attempted an undemocratic, unconstitutional power grab. Were it not for the fact that this state legislature, not content to recognize the results of an election, they then want to block access to the courts. Were it not for the fact that right now, our citizens in this state are fighting day in and day out for that civic sacrament known as the right to vote. And we in North Carolina understand that the ballot box is not colored like those I voted stickers, red, white, and blue. They are literally colored the blood, sweat, and tears of the members of the NAACP.
Amen. That's right.
So we take this matter of a boycott seriously, very seriously. And so we begin first by withdrawing economic support in terms of bringing our national convention, where we might have brought thousands of delegates, millions of dollars, the spotlight of the nation on North Carolina, but because of voter suppression, because of anti-civil rights legislation, because of an undemocratic power grab, because of unconstitutional activity by this state legislature, we've taken that off the table.
That's right.
Now, we know that Reverend Barber, this Moral Monday Coalition, the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, stands in the legacy and lineage of boycotts going back to Ireland of a few centuries ago. We stand in the legacy and lineage of Henry David Thoreau, who connected civil disobedience to economic leverage, i.e. not paying taxes.
That's right.
We understand that we stand in the lineage and legacy of Mohandas K. Gandhi, who marched hundreds of miles to the sea and used the economic leverage of not paying the salt tax. We understand that we stand in the lineage and legacy of Rosa Parks, who began with a single act of civil disobedience, sitting down on a bus that the nation might stand up for its rights. We began with a single act of civil disobedience, and it grew into an economic boycott.
That's right.
So we know
That's right. That's right.
that this North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP has engaged in civil disobedience. They protested, they've demonstrated, they've done all that they can to exercise all the moral persuasion and leverage possible. And so now we have before us a serious choice. Do we go to a full-blown economic boycott, an international boycott? Does the state legislature give up millions of dollars, billions of dollars, thousands and thousands of jobs? Do they give up the prestige of the state, the reputational standing of the state? Do they imperil the state? Or do they do the right thing?
Right thing. Right thing.
That's it. That's it.
Now these folk who come from Asheville to Raleigh, to Fayetteville, to New Bern, to Kinston, these folk understand what they're calling for. They're calling for a boycott that will hurt, a boycott that will be painful, a boycott that will literally bring this state to its knees unless it stands up for civil rights.
That's right.
Now let's note this. What's really going on here? The legislation that we've discussed is not a matter of single-sex bathrooms.
That's it.
Or closed bathrooms.
That's it.
It's a matter of an open voting booth.
Yeah.
It's not a matter merely of gender identity, but a matter of human dignity.
Yes.
It's not merely a matter of a power grab among partisan politicians. It's a matter of our democracy. How many of us have veterans in our families who risked their lives abroad and here at home for these democratic freedoms? And so we say, be very clear. Be very clear.
Yes.
If you try to steal that which our foremothers and our forefathers and our forebears gave to us, we will literally die fighting to protect what they gave us. And as we said to the president only a few days ago when he threatened an executive order on voter fraud, we said in the name of our NAACP martyrs of the vote that any attempt to suppress our votes, to take away our civil rights, will be met with unrelenting resistance. And so in the name of Rosanelle Eaton,
That's right.
in the name of all of our children, in the name of every citizen in the state of North Carolina, in the name of the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, in the name of the Reverend William J. Barber, in the name of everyone here, in the name of every American, we will boycott this state unless this state relents.
Yes.
And as a benedictory note, the resolution, careful lawyers, careful preachers,
That's right.
the resolution ends on the observation that if other states attempt to do what North Carolina has done, they will face what North Carolina faces. So be clear. Be clear. This is the opening prologue of a long-running Democratic narrative that began with the Tea Party, the original Tea Party.
That's right.
That recounts the bravery and courage of our NAACP forebears, and that is being told today by this North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, the National NAACP, and every branch, every state conference across this country. Be clear. Be absolutely clear. Unless you relent, you're going to face unrelenting resistance. Why? Because we understand that if we demonstrate the power of the purse, we will demonstrate the power of our democracy. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Come on. Yes, sir. So it's encouraged our president and CEO. We invited him this morning because we wanted to be very clear.
Yes, sir.
And we wanted people to understand that this is about North Carolina, but so much broader, about the soul of our democracy. Three things, and then we'll take questions from the media. We call on our friends, the LGBT community and the sports community, that pull their conventions just on the bathroom to expand the narrative. Expand the narrative. First of all, we need to stop reporting that HB2 was about bathrooms in the first place. That bill takes away the ability of local municipalities to raise a living wage. It is against workers. It is against white workers and black workers and Latino workers. It denied the ability to have minorities set aside in contracts for municipalities. That hurts women and African Americans and other minorities. This bill said you can't go to state court for employment discrimination. That hurts heterosexuals. That hurts veterans. That hurts the disability. We will no longer allow people to scapegoat the LGBT and the transgender community. And underneath that scapegoating, they pass laws that are counter to our democracy and who we are. As the 14th Amendment says, we all have equal protection under the law. So please, secondly, because we know the track of history, understand that if this legislature had not passed the worst form of apartheid gerrymandering that we've seen since the 19th century, many of them would not be in office.
All right, yes, yes.
Our legislature is unconstitutionally constituted, illegitimate. And the courts unanimously, black and white judges, have ruled as such. And this legislature, to this date, March 15th, they have a deadline. They're supposed to turn in new districts. And we're supposed to have a new election because this General Assembly has been constituted by trickery and thievery and not through the processes of democracy. And to this date, Mr. President, they have not had one hearing or drawn one new district, even though there's a court order. And if we did not have these racially gerrymandered districts, we would not have these extremists and an all-white caucus. An all-white caucus did this in the General Assembly. We would not have that, and we would not have these regressive laws. So there is a connection. There is a connection. And if we did not have voter suppression, and even after we won our case, even after we went into the election, the past administration took 158 voter sites out of the black, brown, and poor community across this state, suppressing thousands of votes. Thousands of votes. This is after victory. And so what we're saying is we're connecting these. Without the voter suppression, racialized voter suppression, without the racialized gerrymandering, you would not have the current makeup of the legislature. They would be fair elections, and more than likely, you would not have regressive bills like HB 2 or SB 4 that attempts to strip power from an incoming governor that a former extremist governor had. And they did it under the guise of helping hurricane victims. This legislature went into special session claiming that they were concerned about children and people, women and fathers and families and elderlies who had lost their homes, and some nearly lost their lives during a hurricane. And instead of helping those people, they passed a storm of legislation to undermine democracy in this state and sent a signal to other states around the South and the country that this is what you do even in defeat. We had no other choice. We did not come to this conclusion lightly, but to write this resolution, ask for this immediacy of pulling our convention and calling on our other brothers and sisters to do it as a first step of economic pressure, and then to engage in the kind of serious thought. Because there's one thing I can say, Mr. President, I know President Brooks will say it. Sometimes people say the NAACP may not move as fast as other groups, but there's a reason. And that's because when we bite, we don't let go. Huh? When we bite, we don't let go.
All right.
It took us from 1909 to 1954 to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, but when we bite, we don't let go. It took us 20-some years to win anti-lynching laws. A lot of people started, but they quit. But when we bite, we don't let go. And we intend, if necessary, to take a bite out of the economy of North Carolina because our moral values, our civil rights, our voting rights mean more to us than money. And in this generation, if they stood up in the past when they had less than we have to do more with more. With less, Rosa Parks sat down. With less, Dr. King marched. With less, Medgar Evers challenged. With less, Kelly Alexander fought. With less, Carolyn Coleman stood up when she was 15 years old. And if they could do more with less, we can certainly do more with more. But there is an opportunity, and that is tomorrow this legislature could repeal. And also, many of these things are in the courts. So if they're overturned by repeal or they're overturned by the courts, then possible furtherance can be stayed. But be very clear, nothing, not even the call for peace when there is no peace. Nothing, not bowing down for an extremist president or bowing down to an extremist legislature, nothing is worth our dignity. Nothing is worth us abandoning the call of justice and righteousness and love and fairness. Nothing is worth us giving up on the soul of this state or the soul of our nation, and yes, even the soul of this democracy. Nothing is worth that. And every day we will fight until the day that our lives are no more, and then we will pass the baton to the next generation, and they will continue to fight until we will stop. But this is the day we will stop, when justice for everybody rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. We have questions today from members of the media. Yes, would you identify yourself?
This is Jonathan Drew from the Associated Press. You said these first steps include avoiding North Carolina with the National NAACP Convention and urging other groups to do so.
And broadening the narrative, because as you know, like the NCAA, the ACA, ACC, NAACP, they've already pulled their convention.
So those are the first steps. What else would a full-blown boycott?
I think we'll hold that right now. That's what we're studying in methodologies, and there are a lot of things. If you read the resolution that we sent out, it said we're looking at every methodology. We're going to look at every divestment, all of those kinds of things. But today we announced the first step, and we put the state on notice. And as you know, in the NAACP, we don't what do they call it when you telegraph every way. But what I heard the president say is every tool that we have learned within our historic fight for justice is on the table for exploration. Mr. President?
So let's note this. What's on the table is a boycott, if you will, of our convention. So we're not bringing our convention to North Carolina. For us to contemplate a full-blown boycott, that means everything else is on the table. We have a very deliberative process. We have a board that represents the whole of the country. And we also have a long and storied, both constitutional and organizational history that illustrates the kinds of tools that might be used. And so, suffice it to say, as Reverend Barber has put it, he said that we take a while to act, but when we bite, we don't let go. It might also be said that when we bite, it hurts.
That's right.
And is there a timetable for deciding on those possible next steps?
So we look forward to a board meeting in May. We will have a convention thereafter. We cannot predict how quickly the board will move, but simply I will note this. The voter suppression and the anti-democratic activity in the country adds an urgency to the question. So in other words, when people are stealing your votes, suppressing your votes, taking your democracy as you speak, you deliberate with a certain kind of urgency.
That's right. That's right. And you should note that we had 2 unanimous votes here in the state conference at the board, unanimous vote to this process, the resolution that all of you have access to now, and 1 state conference president who's on the national board from Texas who offered up that last resolve and broadened the conversation because of what's happening across the country, and because we can no longer allow these extremists to silo us. That's what they attempted to do with the HBT. They said we're going to attack the transgender community and thought we wouldn't read the rest of the bill. It's bad enough to attack the transgender community because that's undermining the 14th Amendment, which can, and you know, I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on Fridays on TV, but that can set a dangerous precedent, right? It can set a precedent that can be used to then justify. And remember, we're in a season where we have a president that at the beginning of his campaign, he threw into the atmosphere, the political discourse, a suggestion about overturning parts of the 14th Amendment. That's dangerous. You undo the 14th Amendment, our whole Constitution falls apart. Because until the 14th Amendment was in place, the Constitution wasn't a piece of paper, but it was terribly flawed. Because it did not apply to all. Equal protection under the law for all. These are serious matters, and that's why we thank the press for not allowing this debate just to be about HB2, transgender, and bathroom. That's a farce anyway. That's a farce anyway. That's a scapegoat. But we have to look deeper at what's really going on here in this state and what is being attempted around the country. Yes, sir. Right here. WRAL. CBS North Carolina. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Governor Cooper has made it clear that he supports what you're calling for here. And I've also heard him speak to Chamber of Commerce type groups. He talk about one of the early challenges he's faced as governor is being able to convince businesses and groups nationally that, in his words, we're not about this. This is not who we are. Still come to North Carolina. Same end goal, but obviously different method.
Sure.
I wonder if you would address that.
Well, he's the governor. We're a civil rights organization.
That's right.
And our job is, what we do is we put pressure. Our job is to stand in that tradition. Part of what we've seen here is the governor is elected, and he was elected and he was elected over the attempts to keep an extremist in office. He won, but then they took his powers. And that's in court too. And they're attempting to take his power to appoint the Board of Election, to have his own appointees. This legislature, you know, has refused. This governor went to them, Mr. President, and offered compromises. And they've refused, and now they've come up with a compromise that really is no compromise. It's actually another disguise as a way to hinder. So in the American history, you have the role of politicians. And we are thankful now to have a governor who is against voter suppression, who's against SB4, who's against HB2, who's for living wages, who's for health care, who's for increased money for public education. But we have a responsibility because the governor cannot override the legislature, and we have a responsibility to put pressure. We, the people, have a responsibility to put pressure. Go ahead.
Let me note this. So I've had the opportunity as the national president and CEO to hear from CEOs, including some from the state of North Carolina.
That's right.
And what I've heard them say is that the NAACP is in a position to empower them to call for the right thing. In the same way that President Lyndon Baines Johnson said to the civil rights community, make me do the right thing. We say to the corporate titans and CEOs of North Carolina, who represent literally the elite class of business titans across the country. Some of the largest corporations are headquartered here in North Carolina. The best thing the NAACP can do is to empower them to do what they know to be the right thing to do. The best thing the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP and the NAACP nationally can do is to empower the state legislature and the governor to do the right thing. Note this: when you have 2,200 units of the NAACP in 50 states, every large city in the country, hundreds and hundreds of small towns on Native American reservations, colleges, high schools, 60 military installations, 5 abroad, we speak for the country. And so we are saying to those powers that be, call for the right thing. We will back you up. We will back you up in the streets, back you up in the legislature, back you up in the courts. But do the right thing.
Do the right thing. One last point before we, and your name? You with? with
ABC 11.
ABC. One important critical piece of this as well, and that is we want folk to understand this narrative. The ACC, the NBA, NCAA, and other artists pulled out just over the bathroom. I want to just be real clear, and we agree that's powerful. What we're doing is expanding the narrative to say maybe if we started engaging like this when states pass voter suppression and create gerrymandered districts, we would never get to bathroom bills. So we're getting to the root of the matter. And we're calling on all of our communities not to, you cannot separate the two. That's why this resolution is written the way it is. And that's why this kind of pressure not only helps to force a shift in the narrative, but as President and CEO Brooks said, it empowers. Look at down through history. These kinds of efforts have always empowered the nation, encouraged the nation, sometimes forced the nation to do the right thing, often misunderstood in the moment of its application, but then appreciated much later as history was written, and we began to see that the people who dared to boycott, dared to protest, dared to go to jail were actually the true patriots. They were actually those who were upholding and securing the future of the democracy.
Jonah Kaplan from ABC 11. You've had a number of organizations recently, including North Carolina Realtors Association, North Carolina Association of Lodging and Restaurants, some progressive cities like the Asheville Chamber of Commerce, Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. They've all endorsed HB 186, if not the necessary language, at least they've endorsed the idea of bipartisan compromise. Now, using your words, Reverend Barber, also white workers, Latino workers, black workers, they all work in these restaurants, they work in these hotels that you're encouraging boycott. That's their tips, that's their salaries. How do they win if North Carolina loses?
North Carolina won't lose because as I said, the pressure we believe historically has been proven has always pushed us to get better. We have persons, you look at this group here, Latinos, LGBT community, white, black, and workers that are already losing. See, let's start with the narrative. They are already losing. When 79% of this state, white, black, Latino, want a raise in the minimum wage and this legislature refuses to even put it on the ballot, they're already losing. When this state passes a voter suppression law that is intentional, that hurts whites, that hurts blacks, that hurts Latinos, they're already losing. When this state engages in the worst form of gerrymandering, we're already losing. When transgender and gay people are afraid and hiding, they're already losing. And what they're crying for is for us to stand together and win. Even the compromises that are being discussed in this building now would not be discussed if the ACC and the NCAA and other folk had not said we're willing to pull out dollars. And so we're on the winning side. Historically, we're on the winning side. You know, I'm a preacher, right? So sometimes Fridays look kind of rough, but we hang in there long enough to see resurrection. All right, so we're gonna, so actually, when people stand up, there are gay people here today, they're Latino, they're black, they're white. When we stand up together and say we will not take this, that in itself is winning. And the very people that are being hurt are crying for all of us to stand against the form of extremism, the totality of extremism that we see in this state.
So is this a new BDS movement, boycott, divest, and sanction, just to North Carolina?
We're very clear what's happening today. I think President and our resolution was very clear of what we've pulled off the table and what we're going to be considering and where we can possibly escalate to. But much of that is dependent on this and they're feeling the pressure. Oh, they're feeling the pressure. They're feeling and they're losing. They've lost. Remember, this legislature lost. They lost in the courts and then tried to undermine our victory. They've lost on gerrymandering and now they're trying to hold up our victory. So the narrative is they're losing. I think 14 times, I don't know if you noticed that in North Carolina, 14 times this legislature passed laws that have been ruled unconstitutional. Yeah. And the former governor signed them. So in a real sense, they're losing and we're continuing to fight and we're going to continue to stand, Mr. President.
Let me note this, that an incomplete compromise hurts. And here's what we mean. Where this bathroom bill, I'll call it the power grab bill legislation, is the ugly byproduct of voter suppression. Workers are losing as we speak.
Yes,
They're
sir.
being hurt economically as we speak. So to have a full solution that addresses voter suppression, the democratization of this this challenged democracy in North Carolina, that's a victory for workers. That's a victory for the citizens of North Carolina. So be clear about this. You can't blame those who are fighting for freedom for the constraints on their freedom.
That's right.
Right? Because bear in mind, these are the folks who've already been going to jail. These are the folks who are taken off from their jobs to ensure that other people have jobs. So the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP and the National NAACP and our branches and state conferences of the NAACP cannot be faulted for the vigor of our advocacy and the moral ambitions of our opposition. So yes, we've got to press in a full-throated way, we've got to demand in a full-throated way for an end categorically, globally, to voter suppression, categorically, globally, to the de-democratization of democracy in the state of North Carolina, and we've got to call for a global categorical ban on the mistreatment of children. Let us note that. Children.
That's right. Children. Let me close the press conference by one more statement, and that is that as we look at the matters before us, and we look at where we are in this current moment, we have no option but to stand up and to fight back. Now I'm going to answer a question that I'm going to contradict an answer you're going to get when you talk to, say, the extremist leader of some of these groups, or even the Republican Party. I'm going to tell you what they're going to tell you. They're going to say a bunch of leftists, are calling for a boycott. That's number one. Number two, they're going to say their agenda will just add $10 billion of taxes, which is a lie. They've been saying that for the last few years. And then they're going to say they're going to make this about protecting children from people being impacted in bathrooms. And they're not going to talk about their losses in the court. They're not going to say that when they raise up this business about bathrooms protecting someone, it's just a cover and a scapegoat. They're not going to tell you that before we even put our agenda out, we had it vetted by the Independent Tax and Policy Group, which says not only is our agenda tax neutral, it actually benefits workers, benefits the sick, benefits education, and is a budget that would create a budget in the black, not in the red. So you're going to hear that other side. But please be very careful to listen and read between the lines, members of the media. We do not have time to play games with our democracy. This is the same group that called their bill a voter integrity bill, but then the courts, when they examined it, called it a voter suppression bill. Yeah. They are very good at saying one thing with their mouth and doing something else with their policies. And we have examined it. We have engaged we've x-rayed it. We know what's going on. We're exposing it. We're going to stand strong as we have. This coalition has been together now 11 years. 11 years. And a few weeks ago, when thousands were right in front of the Capitol, they all declared, forward together, not one step back. Thank you, members of the media. Let's thank our president and CEO for being here today. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We fight, and we fight, and we fight till we win. God bless you. Thank you, John. Yes, sir.